Next, we're going to talk about Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest living Western traditions. We talked about Hinduism, which is the oldest living Eastern tradition and probably the oldest living tradition in general. Zoroastrianism isn't as old as Hinduism. It's around 3,000 years old. And as you can see, there are about 250,000 followers today. It is at least as old, if not older, than Judaism. The founder of Zoroastrianism is a man named Zoroaster, and he also is known by another name, Zarathustra, and a famous German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche has a text called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and that is another name for the founder of Zoroastrianism. Excuse me. We don't know that much about the prophet Zoroaster, and so his life is a bit similar to Lao Tzu and Jesus because we don't know that much about Lao Tzu. And Jesus we know about, but not the earlier part of his life. There are really only two accounts of Jesus' childhood. One at his birth, the Christmas story of his birth in Bethlehem, and second, a story when he's 12 years old and gets lost in the temple, and his parents don't know where he is for a few days. But besides that, we don't know much about Jesus' childhood, and likewise, we don't know much about Zoroaster's childhood. We don't know exactly when he was born. Somewhere, scholars estimate between 1400 and 1000 BCE. There are reports that he got married, even had several wives and multiple children, which is similar and different from figures like Mahavira and Siddhartha, who got married and had a child, but different because of the quantity. We've talked about a lot of sacred texts. We talked about the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Agamas, the Adi Granth. We've talked about the Sutras, the Analects. So the text that gives us information about Zoroaster is called the Avesta. That's the central text in this tradition. The other part of his full name is Spitama, Zarathustra Spitama, and he, like Siddhartha and Mahavira, was a part of a warrior clan. But instead of being in northern India, his clan was part of ancient Persia. That area today is known as Iran, and that's why sometimes people from Iran are called Persian. Another link to Western philosophers, a great ancient Greek philosopher named Plato, it's believed wanted to study with Zoroastrian priests, but was forbidden because there was this conflict between Greece and Persia. But if you look at Plato's writings, there are references to Zoroaster. So one day this angel appears to Zoroaster. This giant angel, about 9 times the size of a human being, appears to Zoroaster and says, "You're the chosen one. You are going to be the prophet of God, and you need to tell the people about Ahura Mazda." And that's the name for God in this tradition, Ahura Mazda. This is a painting of what Zoroaster might have looked like. You see the white clothing, the grown-out beard, and the covering of the head, which some anthropologists might argue has some sort of functional purpose. If you're living in an area where it is dry and hot, it's good to cover your head, it's good to wear white. Zoroaster was not able to convince many people about his vision of the angel, and it actually took him 10 years before he was able to convince anyone that he was a prophet. And even after 10 years, he finally convinces someone, and it's his cousin, Yoma, his cousin. And, imagine if you're... it makes me think of when I was in high school, we used to go door to door. We had to sell things for the school. We used to sell magazine subscriptions, or like Girl Scouts got to sell those cookies. Imagine if other people are doing well and time and hours and weeks go by, you can't sell a darn thing, and you finally sell something, you sell it like to your mom or your cousin. That's sort of what happened with Zoroaster. Very slow start. Convinces his cousin he's a prophet, but then there was a breaking point, a tipping point rather, where he convinces a king. He convinces a monarch named Vishtaspa, and it's believed that he performed a miracle and cured the horse of this king, of this monarch, Vishtaspa. And as we know from Buddhism, when you convince the king, or when you convert a king, you convert the kingdom, and that's how it started to spread. And that's about it that we know about his life. So here's what else we know is the end of his life. He might have lived until 77. The war was still going on, and it's believed that he was killed by an enemy soldier, and he was tending to a flame. The flame and fire are going to be very important. Just like in Buddhism, the flame is a symbol of desire, and nirvana literally means to put out or extinguish the flame of desire. The flame's important in Zoroastrianism for a different reason. It's sacred because it's one of the 4 elements. Today, if you take a chemistry class, you'll learn about over 100 elements, and those are the basic building blocks of the universe. Well, 3,000 years ago, people didn't know about the 100 plus elements. They wrote and spoke about 4, and fire is one of them, and you probably know the other ones, water and air and earth. The revolutionary idea from Zoroastrianism is the belief that there's one and only one God. Before that, you didn't really have any religions that were worshiping one and only one God. You didn't have religions that were monotheistic, in other words. There was belief in multiple gods, polytheism. Even Judaism, which on some accounts is just as old as Zoroastrianism, or this Moses person lived before, when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the tablets with the moral law inscribed on them, the 10 Commandments, one of them is, "Thou shalt have no other gods before Yahweh." Yahweh, that spelling without the vowels, is one of the ways to spell the name of God in Judaism. But strictly speaking, Moses didn't explicitly deny the existence of other gods. So Zoroaster maybe was the first to say, no, there's no validity in any other god. In fact, there's one and only one, exactly one. Ahura Mazda, I mentioned, is the name of God in this tradition. Ahura means Lord, and Mazda means wisdom. So the literal translation is Lord Wise. And in that language, they put the adjective after the noun. So in English, we tend to do the opposite. We put the adjective first. So we would say red car instead of car red. We would say white house instead of house white. But in other languages, like Romance languages, like Italian or Portuguese or Spanish, you put the adjective after the noun typically. So instead of Blanca Casa, you would say Casa Blanca. And there is also belief that the Aryans, which we know about, they contributed the caste system to Hinduism, that they might have influence over this Western tradition, and that their Ahura Mazda might have originally been related or might have just been the high god for the Aryans. Here's something you wouldn't have to know for an exam, but I think it's just interesting, this list of alternative names or phrases for this Ahura Mazda person. My favorite are the first and the last. But the other strong one, perfect holiness, understanding. The unconquerable, I like that one. It sounds like a name of a WWE wrestler. But my number one favorite is the first one. So as someone who asks big questions, who considers religious studies and philosophy, he of whom questions are asked. I really like that one, because questions, especially big, important, central, perennial questions, are so important to the disciplines that I'm involved with. We know about the Dharma Chakra, the Om. We know about symbols in Jainism, symbols, the Yin-Yang in Taoism and Confucianism. So here's a central symbol in Zoroastrianism, and the name of it is the Far Vahar. And you might say, oh, is that Zoroaster depicted in the symbol? It's actually not. It's the name of a guardian spirit named Vravashi. That's Vravashi, and the symbol is the Far Vahar. Zoroastrians are famous for some of the early philosophical work, and one of the issues that they worked on is something that in a more contemporary sense is known as the problem of evil, which is essentially the problem of suffering. If there is a God, if there is a being that is at least all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent for all good or wholly good, then why would such a being allow the suffering of innocence or allow pointless suffering? There seems to be suffering from natural events that cause suffering, natural disasters like hurricanes and floods and earthquakes and lightning creating fire, and disease, smallpox, the Black Death, influenza, HIV, etc., cancer. Why would such a being allow this suffering, or what we might characterize as evil, into the world? And one of the answers from the Zoroastrians is it's about contrast, that we need to have evil. God allows or created evil in the world as a contrast for the good. And if God were to wipe out all the suffering or all the evil, there wouldn't be any good, and the world overall wouldn't be as good. So if you want goodness, or you want if you want the world to be good at all, there needs to be evil. So it's there for the contrast. Evil must exist for good to exist. It's sort of like tallness. If everyone's the same height, say 8 feet tall, you might say, oh, for a second, everyone's tall. But if you think about that for a moment, that's not right. If everyone's 8 feet tall, everyone's not tall. Everyone's the same height. For tallness to exist, you need to have a contrast. You need to have, there needs to be a lack of tallness at some point. Or it's like the relationship of, or it's like the concept of grandparents. Grandparents is a relational concept like tallness. You can't have tallness without a lack of tallness or shortness, and you can't have grandparents unless they're grandchildren, and vice versa. So similarly, you can't have evil with a lack of evil, which is good. This idea of good and evil, this duality, there's the light and the dark, which we see cropping up in Hollywood, of course, films like Star Wars, many other films. We might be able to trace this back to Zoroastrianism. There's the good and the evil. There's a good spirit named Spenta and an evil spirit, Angra Mainyu. And you can see that prefix, or that first name, Angra, certainly looks like angry and anger, and that's what it's connected to. Actually, another name for Angra is Shaitan, or Satan. So the concept of the devil or evilness that these people still conceptualize today, we can trace back to this tradition. Human nature, just like Confucianism, for this tradition is good. And we also have free will to choose good or evil. So our nature is good, but we can still choose evil. There are rewards accordingly. So the idea that humans will be rewarded for good actions in their earthly life and be punished for wicked actions, we can trace this back to this tradition. Here's an account of the afterlife. 3 days after death, the soul stays with the body and meditates on life. So there's this kind of limbo period. And then on the 4th day, there's Judgment Day. So Judgment Day in Christianity might have roots of this. Terminator as a film, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. If there were no Judgment Day in this tradition, we might not have that title. So the idea of judgment passed along the centuries, we can tie back to the judgment in this tradition by Mithra. So there's this thing called the Chinvat Bridge to Paradise or to Hell. Let me go to the next image. We can talk about Mithra and this bridge. So there's Mithra next to the scales. Mithra's on the left, and the person on the right is being judged. So you put all your good deeds on one part of the scale, the bad deeds on the other, and you see which outweighs the other. Either way, you're going to walk across the Chinvat Bridge. You're either going to walk across it to heaven or hell, and depending on the net weight of your deeds, tipping toward evil or toward good, that will determine where you're going to go. If you are going to hell, if your bad deeds outweigh the good, then the Chinvat Bridge, and this is important, the Chinvat Bridge will be narrow like a blade. So in this artist rendition, you could see that bridge is very, very narrow, and there's an old hag who's pointing and laughing at you as you teeter-totter on this very narrow blade-like bridge. Invariably, you will fall off into the pits of hell. You can see those people there falling into the fiery pits of hell. This painting would be different if these people were judged good. Then the bridge would be very, very wide, and you would be escorted by beautiful people into paradise. The nastiness of hell, the fiery pits and the darkness, the way that people conceptualize hell today might be traced back to accounts that we see in this tradition. Now, this is a warning that this is R-rated and will be very, very gruesome to listen to, but this is an account of hell by Arda Viraf, someone who went to hell and lived to tell about it. I saw the greedy jaws of hell, the most frightful pit, descending in a very narrow, fearful crevice, and in darkness so murky that I was forced to feel my way amid such a stench that all whose nose inhaled that air struggled, staggered, and fell. And in such confinement that existence seemed impossible. Each one thought, I am alone. I saw the soul of a man through whose fundament a snake went in, like a beam, and came forth out the mouth, and many other snakes ever seized his limbs. So fundament, that's your rear end. What sin, I inquired, was committed by this body whose soul suffers so severe a punishment? This, I was told, is the soul of a man who in the world committed sodomy. So there's sort of an eye for an eye. If you commit sins in your earthly life, you will be punished accordingly, proportionately in hell. So you commit sodomy in your earthly life, then you get a snake in the fundament in hell. So this is so that was one sin. There are 3 sins and 3 punishments that we get with this eyewitness testimony. A woman's soul I saw, to whom they gave to drink one cupful after another of the impurity and filth of men. Yuck. I asked, what sin was committed by the body whose soul thus suffers? Having failed to abstain, they replied, this wicked woman approached water and fire during menstruation. So Zoroastrians are really big on purity, and they are particularly interested in keeping the 4 elements pure: fire, water, earth, and air. And so this is a male-dominated, obviously sexist, at least to a certain degree, religion. There's the belief that the menstrual fluid from women is impure and dirty. And so if a woman were menstruating and approached something pure like fire or water, she would be committing a sin. She would be tainting that pure fire and water, and so you get a punishment, have to drink the impurity and filth of men. If you're going to be dirty and you're going to make pure things dirty, then you are going to be have to be subject to that filth in the afterlife. And then finally, this is the worst one, believe it or not. I saw the soul of a man into whose mouth they poured continually the menstrual discharge of women. And that sounds bad enough. There's more. While he cooked and ate his own child. Man, they had an imagination when they wrote this. Yuck. While in the world, I was told, that wicked man had intercourse with a menstruating woman. Again, you're taking something that's pure, like intercourse between husband and wife, and then it's made dirty with the contamination of the menstruating woman. So again, this idea of purity and that women, when they're menstruating, are impure. So some very old-fashioned, very sexist reasoning here. Here's the silver lining. There's some good news. Hell ends. At the end of time, souls in hell join the souls of the righteous. Angra Mainyu and his demons are destroyed forever. Let's talk about some of the burial rituals. So there's this interesting tower called a dakma. It's a tower of silence. And it looks like this, or this, or this, or this. So it's away from the city, away from the village. It can be the size of a stadium. The top of this tower is dug out, and on the inside, that's where corpses are put. Now, if you think about it, this makes sense. If you believe that the four elements are sacred, that includes earth, and that includes fire. So what do people do with corpses today? They usually cremate them or bury them. Well, that's no good in this tradition. If you cremate a corpse, if you cremate the dead, that's going to taint the fire. And if you bury the dead, that's going to taint the earth. So far away in this very dry well, away from the village, away from the town, they'll put the corpses and they will let the vultures get at them. The vultures will do their thing, circle around, eat the meat off the bones, and then the bones are cleansed, but only after the vultures have done their thing. You might be thinking, well, what do they do today? Well, some dakmas might be in use, but a lot of those 250,000 Zoroastrians, they will either use a stone casket that's lined with lead, so that way, if you have a wooden casket, that will eventually decompose and the corpse will touch the earth. That's no good. But if it's a stone casket lined with lead, then that decomposition won't ever happen, or it will take a really, really long time. And if you do cremation, then the trick is to use electrical heat. You know how that with your stoves, there can be a gas stove. You also could have an electrical stove. The electrical stove doesn't use gas, it uses electricity, and that's how it gets its heat. The idea there is it's not really a flame if it's electricity. Here is another kind of more modern day image of the Zoroastrianism Vahar. You can see there you've got different elements. You've got the wings that birds use to fly through the air. You've got the fire. You've kind of got the fire on a foundation, which can be the ground. You got the color blue for water. As I've said many times, religions don't originate in vacuums. They have roots in something that came before. And many of the traditions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, etc. have roots in Zoroastrianism. So here's some of the influence. Before the Jewish culture of the time were exposed to Zoroastrianism, Judaism had little to no mention of life after death in heaven, God's plan for bringing the earth to an end, angels, or the day of judgment. So you might say, wait a second, I thought you said Zoroastrianism is older than Judaism. Well, on some accounts it is, but even if it came after, still Judaism might not have been exposed to Zoroastrianism, even though Zoroastrianism could be older. So that's what's going on there. And then a couple of their final notes about this tradition. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in the 4th century BCE, and that's one of the reasons why there aren't millions of people in this faith today. That's so it's because of an historical anecdote, because of a shift of power, because of war, because of this Alexander the Great. That's when this tradition began its decline. And then 5 centuries later, when Islam started to spread in the 9th century, there was a lot of conversion. Some of it, I'm sure, was by choice, and a lot of it might have been forced conversion. So that's it for our short lecture on Zoroastrianism.